Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to look into today is that of Phillip Austin, a British triple murderer that one day just decided that he was going to kill, and it is known as one of Britain's most shocking murders. This case was suggested by Ian, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have, and if you have any more, please let me know. Phillip Austin was born in 1969 in Northampton in England. Now, I couldn't find his parents' name. I could not find anything about his childhood. There's just nothing. The earliest thing literally that I could find was in 1991 when he met a woman in a pub who he would later marry. Her name was Claire Louise Quinn, and he made the first move by buying her a rose. These two really hit it off, you know, they got on really well, they both really liked each other, and they soon began dating. A few months later, she was actually pregnant to him. They hadn't been really together that long. They were still in the stages of getting to know each other, really, you know, but these things happen, and she fell pregnant, and as a result of that, whether he felt like it was, I don't know, like an honourable thing to do, again, this was the 90s, and a lot of people didn't like having children out of wedlock and things like that. So he actually did propose to her and she accepted. Claire gave birth to her son called Kieran Michael, and then not long after she fell pregnant again. In 1992 they moved to Northampton, and that is where she would eventually give birth to her daughter, who they called Jade Carroll. In the summer of 1993, and this was 3 months after Jade was born, they got married. It seems like Phillip wasn't really a people person. Like, he found social interactions slightly awkward from the wedding footage and things like that. And he was a little bit strange. Like, before the marriage, he had disowned literally his entire family. I don't know the reasons behind it. I don't have a clue why. But he did. And he had 0 friends. And so, you have the best man at your wedding, don't you? Well, he didn't have any friends. So he actually had to use one of Claire's friends as his best man. So it was just a bit of a weird circumstances surrounding it all. Claire worked as an auxiliary nurse and Phillip worked as a forklift truck operator, and he would normally do night shifts. Eventually, Claire decided that she wanted to change her career and she would begin to work for Northamptonshire County Council as part-time home help. Now, from the outside of this marriage looking in, the 7 years that they spent together, you know, was really happy, and there didn't seem to be any problems and things like that. But on the inside, there were some problems. Phillip was verbally abusive. He was the kind of person that would always try and put his wife down. Like, say she was a little bit overweight, he would constantly be going on about her weight and shaming her for it, amongst other things. Like, he was just not very nice towards her. If, say, they had an argument, Phillip would pack up a bag and he'd leave, and it was to try and prove that the household needed him for some reason. I don't know whether it was a control thing for him. I don't know. He would also do things like, if the family was struggling for money, he'd just go out and buy things for himself. Like, they had a lot of money troubles, and you'll see throughout the case, you know, but, well, I won't say a lot of money troubles, but they weren't really well off, and so when they were struggling, he would just go out and buy himself a watch or just something that he didn't even need, and he knew that they were struggling, and yet he just went out and bought it for himself. It's like, you're supposed to support your family and be there for them and contribute, and not just take all the money and go and spend it on yourself. But that was just the kind of person that he was. The stuff that he was getting, he didn't need, like, at all, and yet he's out there buying it just to spend money that they didn't have. And that just put more stress on Claire. Not only is he verbally abusive to her, and mentally that is obviously very draining for her to be constantly put down by your own husband. I don't know, that's so horrible, and I don't even know how much of a mental toll that took on her. I can imagine, and I guess that's why he did it. It's just like another form of punishing her, really. So skip forward to the year 2000, and you've got Patrick and Claire, who are now both 31-year-old. Kieran is 8-year-old and Jade is 7-year-old. They also have 2 poodle dogs called Dandy and Sooty, along with a cat called Snoopy. They have a lovely little family going on, you know, everything seems wonderful, well, from the outside at least. Kieran, being 8 years old, was this typical lad. He loved to eat, he would never ever stop talking, and he absolutely adored his mum. Even though he was only a year older than his little sister, he took the kind of older brother protecting his younger sister role, you know, very seriously, and he did it fiercely. He would do anything to make sure that his little sister was okay. Jade had this really cheeky and mischievous side to her. She loved things like jewellery, like little girls do, and she would often raid her grandmother's jewellery box and wear her jewellery and things like that. Her grandmother was called Carol and her grandfather was called Harry, and Harry absolutely adored, well, he adored both the grandkids, I'm not saying that he didn't, but Jade was like, he used to think of her as his little princess, and she could do no wrong in his eyes. On occasions, Claire would ring up her parents and, you know, she'd tell him how cheeky like Jade has been, and he would just say, laugh it off and say that he didn't believe that was possible, you know, because he just saw her as this little princess. Around this time, Claire was attending a diet class, and it was probably because her so-called loving husband was constantly putting her down about her weight and often would shame her about it, which is just so awful. Anyway, she was doing really well in it. On one occasion, she won Slimmer of the Month, and I don't think Patrick really liked that because, you know, his main thing that he could do was at least shame her for her weight in his eyes. And now she's losing weight and she's, you know, being happier in herself. And he could no longer shame her because he's the one that's now the heaviest he's ever been and Claire's losing weight. It was like it's all shifted, and I don't believe he liked it at all. Along with that, Claire had actually gotten her driving license, whereas previously she had relied on Patrick to take her everywhere. Now she gained her independence from him. She could go out and do what she wanted, and she didn't need him, essentially. And again, that wasn't something that he welcomed, let's just put it that way. The family went on this lovely holiday with some friends to the Canary Islands, and whilst there they took, you know, the camera, they took videos, they took photos, everyone seemed happy. Patrick seemed happy enough, but one of the friends who went did say that they began to see a side of Patrick that they'd never seen before. He kept asking like why they were there, what was the point, and why did they book the holiday in the first place. Things like that. That's obviously very strange. You book a holiday to go out and enjoy it and have fun with your family and friends, whoever you're going with. You have fun and you enjoy it, and it's just a break from everything, and yet he's there saying like, what's the point, why are we even here, kind of thing. It's very strange. Apparently at one point he even squared up to this friend over literally nothing. On the 10th of July in the year 2000, the day began like any normal day. I have said a million times before, it always does. Philip got home from his normal night shift. He came home to Claire, who was getting the kids ready for school. Philip dropped them off at the school, which was Standings Bar Lower School. And normally after doing a really long night shift, all you want to do is maybe grab a bit of food and then go home to sleep. And normally he would say drop off the kids and then he would go straight home. On this occasion, he decides that he's going to go to McDonald's and grab a McDonald's breakfast. So that is what he does, which isn't super out of the ordinary because I've previously done night shifts and, you know, sometimes you're starving. So you go for food and then you go and sleep. So he's at McDonald's. Whilst he's there eating his food, he decided previously to buy an Auto Trader magazine and a newspaper. And in this Auto Trader magazine, he has circled a few cars that were, I don't know if they were for sale or for rent or whatever, but he's put a few circles on these car adverts. After he leaves McDonald's, he then goes to an exotic massage parlour, which is obviously a front for, you guys already know what. He then goes to a hardware store where he purchases a rubber mallet. This rubber mallet apparently was for some gardening that he needed doing, even though their garden didn't need anything doing. And how are you going to do things in a garden with a rubber mallet? It's not a tool that you use in the garden normally. But that's what he said anyway, that's what he claimed. Philip came home at 1 PM. And this is his version of events, what he said happened. Claire was apparently upstairs and she'd asked him where he'd been, because obviously he should be tired and sleeping at this point like he normally would be, so she's wondering where he's been. They began arguing, I don't know how they got to this, but they began arguing about booking another holiday. So, you know, a lot of people who really enjoy the holiday come back and book another one for the next year. So I don't know whether those were their plans or whatever, but they begin arguing over this holiday because he wants to have this nasal surgery for his snoring, And obviously Claire wants a family holiday so that the kids and everyone can enjoy themselves. So his is more selfish, not selfish. I get snoring's like can be really bad for people and things, but surely you'd think that being a father, he would want to take his kids on holiday over like a snoring surgery. I mean, maybe I'm wrong with that. That's just my opinion, I don't know. But I assume that Claire obviously wanted the holiday and he obviously wanted the surgery. Regardless of the reasons behind it all, the argument turned violent. Let me just move this over here. I didn't realise it was over there. So Philip becomes violent and he swung the mallet at Claire. I believe it hit her arm. They began a physical fight from that. They began upstairs and I don't know how it happened, but they ended up downstairs. At one point Claire's opening the front door and trying to run out of there and he's slamming it shut and like not letting her escape kind of thing. They were fighting all over the house. The fight eventually ended with Claire being on the floor. I don't know whether Philip tripped her up, whether she accidentally fell. Who knows, but she's on the floor. Apparently Philip then began hitting her until she actually passed out, like I think her head against the floor kind of thing. He then got the mallet and he got a knife from the kitchen and he stabbed Claire with it with such force that the handle actually broke. He then retrieved another knife and then stabbed her again. At some point he goes to get one of her bras from the laundry and he strangles her with it. He then callously pushes her body to the side and goes on to his next targets, which are the dogs. He batters the dogs to death with the mallet and they both end up with crushed skulls. At this point, obviously, he's covered in blood, like the dog's blood, his wife's blood. So he goes upstairs and he gets changed and then he goes to pick up the kids. He's calm, he's collected, like nothing's happened. He drives around telling them that he's going to treat them to a chippy tea. Probably fish and chips. I don't exactly know what they had. But the kids would have been really excited, you know. It's like, sometimes it's considered for families like a really nice treat to go to the chippy and have a chippy tea. And so they were probably really excited about it. A few hours later, he returned home with them. Philip drugs the kids with Nitol, which is a sleeping aid. And this knocks them out. He then puts his children in their bed and he strangles them to death. Philip murdered his entire family and they were murdered by the one person that should have loved them the most. The one person that should have been there to protect them. He even killed the dogs. Like, I mean, everyone was wiped out. Well, not the cat. The cat survived. I don't know whether the cat wasn't in. Obviously, a lot of people let cats out and so maybe the cat wasn't there at the time. Maybe if the cat was there, he would have killed that too. I don't know, but he literally just brutally took out his entire family, including pets. So, as I've told you, this occurred in July. Now, July of the year 2000 in the UK was a pretty traumatic month for the UK. It was shocking. It was filled with some really, really tragic news. Obviously, I've just told you about what has just happened. That is in July, of course. And not only that, a little girl called Sarah Payne had actually gone missing that very same month, that very same year. I have done a video on Sarah Payne. If you want to check that out and, you know, go more into detail on that, I'll put a link, a card on this video for it. But long story short, her body was actually found on the 17th of July. Now, this comes into play because obviously not only is it a tragic month for the UK, but Carol, which is Claire's mother, was actually doing her ironing at the time that the news broke that Sarah Payne's body had been found. And she is literally ironing, thinking about how horrific it would have been if that was her grandchildren. Now, of course, we know what has tragically happened to them, but at the time she didn't. She would later find out the immense pain that would come with, you know, such a traumatic thing because it had actually happened to her grandchildren and she didn't even know. Later that very same day, she gets a phone call from the secretary at the kids' school. They're wondering as to why the children have not been attending classes all week. And obviously nobody has given any reason as to why, like they've been ill or whatever. Nobody's rang in. They've just not seen them. Knowing it was totally out of character for the kids to not be in school, and then realising that actually she'd not heard of Claire this past week either, she began to get worried. They rushed over to Claire's house on Stockmead Road and they decide to go inside. Now, Harriet goes in first. He goes in and he sees the devastating sight that his daughter's body is on the kitchen floor, surrounded by a pool of her own blood. He quickly turns around and goes straight back out of there, and he tells Carol to not go in there because Claire has done something terrible to herself. She replied straight away with, no, she hasn't, and she pushed past her husband and she went into that kitchen and found the horrible scene for herself. Claire was dead in a pool of her own blood, and one of the poodles was actually next to her. Thinking her of her grandchildren, you know, Carol legs it upstairs and she goes to their bedrooms where she uncovers the horrific scene of her grandchildren. Kieran's in his bed and Jade is on the floor of her bedroom. Carol noted that when she went in, the stench was truly horrific, and that's probably because they had been literally sat there for a week. Obviously, police were called. Phillip was gone. He was their main suspect and they began looking for him. He was on the run. He ended up going to Scarborough. He was in Blackpool for a short period of time, and eventually, I believe, between a week and 10 days after, you know, the bodies being found, they actually found him in the Lake District. He had attempted suicide. He had cuts to his wrists, but somebody, I don't know how they found him, somebody found him passed out in the car or something like that, so they took him for medical attention, and then obviously they took him into the station for questioning. They took him in, they asked him why he'd attacked Claire, and he just callously said, she started hassling me and arguing and that. I just turned on her. When the same question was put forward to him with relation to his children, he replied with, then it sort of came to me that I had killed her, so I went upstairs and I killed my children. He just came out with it, not a care in the world, no remorse, no regret, no nothing about wiping out his entire family. He just did not care. It later came out that the pair did have financial troubles and that Phillip had a very low self-worth at the time of this happening. Not that that excuses it, because of course it doesn't. Nothing ever will. On the 24th of July in 2000, Phillip Austin appeared in court and he pled not guilty due to diminished responsibility, you know, like a lot of people do to try and get out of it. Then on the 22nd of March in 2001, he actually changed his plea to guilty. And he was charged with a life sentence with a minimum tariff of 20 years. In the years since this brutal murder, the family, you know, Claire's family have just been left to suffer. I always say that my heart goes out to them because in these cases, it's so tragic that somebody's life was stolen, but the people who are left behind that love that person, you know, so much, are the ones that have to carry on, knowing what happened, knowing that they are never ever going to see that person ever again, and they have to live with those terrible things that happened, and it must just be so impossible to move forward from that. Carol said that when it first happened, she suffered with horrific nightmares, and she still does. She can't get the image of finding, you know, her family's bodies, which has been burned in her mind, and how their bodies were just left there like pieces of rubbish. Whilst Phillip was in jail, Carol really wanted to face him. She really wanted to get eye to eye with him and ask him why he had done it. But he would never face her. He never gave any reasons as to why he'd done it to her. Carol's family is buried in a local cemetery very close to where she lives, and every morning she walks the dog there and she goes to visit them. She misses the family so much. She's very often very angry at having them being stolen away from her. Carol even said that Phillip will never know how much he has tortured me. Ever since he killed my family, my husband and I became different people, and that will never be fair. Her other son Matthew has also been on antidepressants ever since the brutal murder of his sister and his niece and nephew, and it was something that just completely broke him. On the 21st of March in 2021, which was 20 years later now, at the age of 51, Phillip Austin came up for parole. And that was something Claire's family have been dreading for years. You know, he didn't get a full life sentence without the possibility of parole. He got 20 years. And so when that is up, you know, he could potentially get out. His hearing happened on the 9th of April, where he was denied parole, but it was recommended that he be moved to an open prison. There's less security there, you know, they have a bit more freedom, and not only that, he could have applied for this temporary release license. That means that he would be allowed home leave or even be able to do some local community work. Carol has led a haunted life since the murder of her family, and she was just so worried about him being released. She really does think that he could reoffend again. You know, he's literally 51-year-old. If he got out, he could start a new family, and he has the potential to do something like this again. She's of course obviously worried about her other son as well, and how if Phillip did get out, how that would affect him. He's already on antidepressants and has just been so broken. And so if he was out there again, who knows what it'd do to him. Carol wants a life sentence to mean just that. Because his sentence ran concurrently, he just got 20 years. And because of all this, she's since sent out a petition to make sure that a life sentence means just that. She has a target of 10,000 signatures at the time of me recording this case. It had 8,250 signatures, so if you want to go and check that out and sign up to it, then be my guest. I believe that she needs 100,000 signatures for it to be considered by UK Parliament. So who knows, maybe she can get it up there and get it into the Parliament, and if we share this petition around, maybe she can change something. Phillip went on to state that he wasn't looking to be released from prison, but just a little bit more freedom, which of course, if he went to the open jail, he would have got. However, this was actually rejected, so Phillip won't be going to no open prison. He's going to stay exactly where he is. This case is just so heartbreaking. With no reason whatsoever, he just turns around and he literally wipes out his entire family, leaving everyone behind to pick up the pieces and suffer so much, you know, it's just so tragic, and my heart just goes out to him. But yeah, that is the end of the case. If you've enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for similar content. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Phillip Austin. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.